10 Golden Age stars who were forced into fake marriages. When people talk about Hollywood's Golden Age, they describe elegance, romance, and timeless glamour. Perfect couples, perfect smiles, perfect lives. But what most audiences never saw was the machinery behind that perfection. A system where studios didn't just control movies, they controlled human beings. Your image wasn't yours, your love life wasn't private, and your future depended on how convincingly you could sell a fantasy. For many stars, marriage wasn't about love, it was about survival. If your personal truth threatened the studio's moral image, a solution was imposed: a carefully staged wedding approved by publicists, protected by contracts, and performed for cameras. These weren't unions of the heart. They were strategic disguises. Today, we uncover the stories of Golden Age icons who were pressured, manipulated, or forced into marriages they never truly chose. These are not gossip stories. These are stories of control, sacrifice, and the hidden cost of fame. If you want to understand how success, power, and fame really work behind closed doors, subscribe to The Success Discovery. Here, we don't just celebrate achievement, we uncover the truth behind it. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us because the stories ahead reveal what Hollywood worked hardest to hide. Rock Hudson, the marriage that protected a manufactured man. Rock Hudson was not just a movie star, he was a carefully engineered symbol. In the 1950s and early 1960s, Hollywood needed leading men who embodied strength, confidence, and traditional masculinity. Hudson fit that image perfectly. Tall, handsome, soft-spoken, yet commanding, he was marketed as the ideal romantic hero. But behind the scenes, studio executives feared one thing above all else: the truth. Hollywood insiders were fully aware that Hudson's private life didn't align with the image being sold to the public. In an era where even rumors could end careers overnight, authenticity was considered a threat. Rather than allowing Hudson to live honestly, the studio chose to rewrite his reality. The solution was marriage. Hudson was strongly pressured to marry Phyllis Gates, the secretary of his powerful agent, Henry Wilson. This was not a coincidence. Gates was accessible, cooperative, and safe in the eyes of the studio. The marriage was arranged quickly and promoted aggressively. Magazines published smiling photographs. Interviews spoke of domestic happiness. Public appearances were choreographed to reinforce the illusion of a stable heterosexual marriage. Behind closed doors, the reality was painfully different. Hudson felt trapped in a role that extended far beyond the movie set. Gates, by her own later admissions, believed the marriage might become real, a belief encouraged by those who orchestrated it. The emotional imbalance was devastating. Hudson withdrew. Gates grew increasingly confused and hurt, and the studio remained silent as long as the image held. After 3 years, the marriage collapsed. Officially, it ended due to incompatibility. Unofficially, it ended because it was never real to begin with. By then, however, the studio had already achieved its goal. Hudson's career had been protected during his most profitable years. The long-term cost was enormous. Living a double life created deep emotional isolation. Hudson learned that success came with a condition: silence. His later illness and death would finally expose the truth Hollywood had hidden for decades, forcing the industry to confront the cruelty of its own system. Rock Hudson's marriage was not a personal failure. It was a corporate decision, one that treated a human life as a brand to be protected at any cost. Tab Hunter, romance as a performance, love as a risk. Tab Hunter's rise to fame was fast, fragile, and tightly controlled. In the early 1950s, Hollywood discovered that teenage girls could turn a handsome young actor into a cultural phenomenon almost overnight. Hunter became that phenomenon. He wasn't just an actor, he was a fantasy product, carefully packaged for fan magazines, movie posters, and radio interviews. Every detail of his public life was scripted to appeal to a young, romantic audience. From the beginning, studios understood that Hunter's career depended entirely on perception. His image had to remain innocent, available, and unmistakably heterosexual. Any deviation from that narrative could cause instant collapse. Because of this, his private life became a performance just as important as his films. Hunter was regularly paired with actresses in what were called studio romances. These relationships followed a predictable pattern: public dates, photographed outings, gossip column mentions, and subtle hints of something more serious. Marriage rumors were intentionally planted to give fans a sense of permanence and safety. In reality, these relationships were temporary arrangements, designed to distract from anything the studio didn't want discussed. Privately, Hunter was involved in long-term relationships with men, including individuals who were themselves deeply embedded in Hollywood's power structure. These relationships were genuine, emotional, and meaningful, yet they had to exist entirely in the shadows. The fear of exposure was constant. One photograph, one overheard conversation, one careless moment could destroy everything he had built. Unlike some of his peers, Hunter managed to avoid being pushed into an actual marriage. But that wasn't due to understanding or mercy. It was timing, careful negotiation, and relentless self-control. Studio executives viewed marriage as the ultimate safeguard, a final seal on his image. The pressure never disappeared. It simply paused. Years later, when Hunter finally told his story openly, it became clear how psychologically damaging this double life had been. Fame brought admiration, but also isolation. Love brought comfort, but also danger. His story shows that even when a fake marriage didn't happen, the threat of one was always present, a reminder that truth was a liability in Golden Age Hollywood. Lana Turner, Marriage as a Crisis, Management Tool. Lana Turner's life proves that fake marriages weren't only about hiding sexuality. Sometimes they were about controlling chaos. Turner was magnetic, emotional, and fiercely independent, traits that made her a star and a problem. Hollywood loved her beauty but feared her unpredictability. When her personal life threatened studio profits, the solution was often the same: marriage. Turner's relationships were heavily scrutinized by studios and gossip columnists alike. Any scandal, a messy breakup, a violent partner, or negative headlines had the potential to damage her box office value. To manage this, studios encouraged Turner into rapid, highly publicized marriages that could reset her public image. Several of these marriages were rushed, poorly matched, and emotionally unstable. They were framed as romantic fairy tales, but behind the scenes, they were strategic distractions. A wedding redirected press attention. A husband provided an appearance of stability. Divorce, when it came, was quietly managed and quickly replaced with a new narrative. The emotional cost to Turner was immense. Instead of being given space to heal or choose freely, she was repeatedly guided toward relationships that served public perception rather than personal well-being. Marriage became less about companionship and more about damage control. What makes Turner's story particularly tragic is that she genuinely wanted love, yet the system around her turned that desire into a tool. Her marriages weren't always fake in intention, but they were manufactured in timing, driven by studio pressure rather than emotional readiness. Lana Turner's life reveals a darker truth about Hollywood's golden age. Even women whose sexuality wasn't questioned were denied autonomy. Their hearts were secondary to headlines, stability was staged, and marriage, once again, became a performance. Cary Grant, ambiguity as a studio strategy. Cary Grant remains one of Hollywood's most enduring icons. Charming, witty, effortlessly sophisticated, he wasn't just admired, he was idealized. Yet behind that polished exterior was a life carefully managed by studios that understood something crucial. Mystery could be profitable, but truth could be dangerous. Grant married multiple times, and on the surface, these marriages reinforced his image as a classic romantic leading man. But within Hollywood circles, there were long-standing rumors about his close emotional relationships with men. These rumors were never confirmed publicly, and that was exactly how the studios wanted it. Rather than allowing speculation to spiral, marriage became a containment strategy. Unlike Rock Hudson's situation, Cary Grant's case was more subtle. He was not forced into a single obvious cover marriage. Instead, his repeated marriages created a continuous narrative of heterosexual normalcy. Each relationship served as reinforcement, a reminder to the public that Grant fit the expected mold. Whether the marriages were emotionally genuine or partially strategic varied, but their timing and promotion often aligned perfectly with studio interests. Grant himself was deeply private. He rarely spoke about his inner life, preferring control over vulnerability. That privacy worked in Hollywood's favor. The less he explained, the easier it was to project whatever image audiences wanted to see. Studios leaned into that ambiguity, knowing that marriage headlines could silence uncomfortable questions without directly addressing them. The emotional toll, however, was real. Grant's marriages were often short-lived and turbulent, marked by emotional distance and misunderstanding. The constant need to perform stability created strain both for him and his partners. While Grant maintained his career and legacy, his personal life reflected the cost of living under perpetual scrutiny. Cary Grant's story illustrates a refined version of Hollywood control, one where plausible deniability replaced outright deception. Marriage wasn't always fake, but it was undeniably useful. It allowed the system to maintain its illusion without confronting reality. Barbara Stanwyck, a mutually beneficial illusion. Barbara Stanwyck was respected for her talent, strength, and independence. Unlike many actresses of her time, she projected authority rather than fragility. Yet, even someone as formidable as Stanwyck was not immune to Hollywood's rigid expectations. Her marriage to Robert Taylor has long been discussed as one of Golden Age Hollywood's most strategic unions. Both were rising stars. Both were under pressure to conform. And both benefited professionally from the appearance of a traditional heterosexual marriage. Within the industry, it was widely understood that the marriage offered protection. It stabilized public perception, silenced rumors, and allowed both careers to flourish without interference. Whether affection existed between them mattered less than the function the marriage served. Publicly, the couple was presented as glamorous and respectable. Privately, the relationship was emotionally distant. Their lives often ran parallel rather than intertwined. After several years, the marriage ended quietly, without scandal, another sign of careful management. What makes Stanwyck's case significant is the mutual nature of the arrangement. This was not a single star being sacrificed for a studio's comfort. It was two people navigating a system that offered limited choices. Marriage became a shield they could both stand behind. Stanwyck went on to build a long, respected career, while Taylor continued his rise as a leading man. Professionally, the strategy worked. Personally, it reinforced a painful truth. Even strong, self-made women had to negotiate their authenticity for survival. Barbara Stanwyck's story shows that fake or strategic marriages weren't always imposed violently. Sometimes they were quiet agreements, made in a world where honesty came at too high a price. Montgomery Clift, when refusing the script, destroyed the star. Montgomery Clift was never meant to survive Golden Age Hollywood, not because he lacked talent, but because he lacked compliance. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Clift didn't fully submit to the studio system's demands. He was sensitive, introspective, emotionally open, and deeply uncomfortable with performing a life that wasn't his own. In an industry that demanded certainty, Clift embodied contradiction. From early in his career, rumors about Clift's private life circulated quietly but persistently. Studio executives saw the danger immediately. They pushed him toward a solution that had worked for others: marriage. A respectable wife would quiet speculation, stabilize his image, and allow the machine to keep moving. But Clift resisted. Not loudly, not defiantly, just consistently. Instead of marriage, the studios attempted partial fixes, carefully staged friendships with actresses, public appearances that suggested romance without commitment, gossip column narratives that implied inevitability. But Clift never followed through. He couldn't bring himself to enter a union that felt dishonest, and Hollywood noticed. This refusal came at a cost. Unlike stars who accepted fake marriages and were rewarded with protection, Clift was left exposed. His privacy eroded, pressure intensified. The constant surveillance, combined with his own internal conflicts, began to fracture him psychologically. The studio system didn't know how to manage a star who wouldn't play along, so it slowly withdrew support. After his devastating car accident in 1956, Clift's vulnerability became visible. His appearance changed. His confidence weakened, and instead of compassion, the industry responded with distance. A marriage might have preserved the illusion. Without it, Clift was seen as unstable, difficult, risky. Montgomery Clift's story reveals something crucial. Fake marriages weren't just tools of deception. They were insurance policies. Those who accepted them were protected. Those who didn't were left to fall. Anthony Perkins, a family life built under fear. Anthony Perkins became immortal through Psycho, but long before Norman Bates, Hollywood was already uneasy with him. Perkins was soft-spoken, intellectually inclined, and emotionally complex, traits that didn't align neatly with traditional masculine expectations of the time. Almost immediately, studios began monitoring his private life with concern. Perkins had relationships with men that were well known within Hollywood's inner circles. Publicly, however, this reality was unacceptable. Executives feared that exposure would permanently brand him as unmarketable. The solution, once again, was marriage, but in Perkins' case, it came later and under different circumstances. When Perkins married Barry Berenson, the public saw a romantic turning point. Handsome actor, beautiful wife, children, stability. To audiences, it looked like a happy ending. But to those close to Perkins, the marriage also functioned as protection, a final layer of insulation against scrutiny. This does not mean the marriage lacked affection or care. Perkins loved his family. But the context matters. The decision existed inside a culture of fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of losing work, fear of becoming the next cautionary tale. Throughout his life, Perkins lived with the tension of concealment. He compartmentalized his identity, separating professional survival from personal truth. Marriage allowed him to exist safely within the system, but it never removed the psychological burden of hiding. Even late in life, Perkins spoke cautiously. He understood that Hollywood had long memories and limited forgiveness. His marriage offered him space, not freedom, but breathing room. Anthony Perkins' story shows how fake or strategic marriages evolved over time. They weren't always cold arrangements. Sometimes they were compromises made under pressure, attempts to build a life while avoiding destruction. Ramon Novarro, when refusing the lie, cost everything. Ramon Novarro was one of the earliest international superstars Hollywood ever created. During the silent film era, his expressive face, refined charm, and emotional intensity made him irresistible to audiences around the world. Studios marketed him as a romantic ideal, sensitive yet masculine, exotic yet respectable. For a time, his fame seemed untouchable, but as Hollywood transitioned into the sound era, the industry also hardened its moral boundaries. Inside the studio system, Novarro's personal life was no secret. Executives knew, fellow actors knew, publicists knew. What changed was tolerance. By the early 1930s, Hollywood had become far less willing to overlook anything that didn't fit strict social expectations. Rumors were no longer manageable. They were dangerous. The studio solution was immediate and familiar: marriage. A carefully selected wife would stabilize Novarro's image, silence gossip, and preserve his place in the industry. The proposal wasn't framed as a choice. It was presented as a necessity. Many stars before him had complied and survived. Novarro hesitated. Unlike others, he never fully committed to the lie. He avoided permanent arrangements, resisted long-term public narratives, and delayed decisions that studios considered urgent. This hesitation alone marked him as unreliable. In Hollywood, uncertainty was worse than scandal. As a result, the system slowly turned against him, Leading roles diminished. Studio enthusiasm faded. Casting opportunities dried up without explanation. There was no dramatic firing, no public scandal, just quiet erasure. Hollywood didn't need to destroy him publicly. It simply stopped supporting him. Novarro's later years were marked by isolation and disappointment. A man who once symbolized romance was left outside the industry he helped build. His downfall was not due to lack of talent or audience rejection. It was the cost of refusing to perform a false life. His story proves that in Golden Age Hollywood, compliance was currency. Those who refused to buy into the illusion were discarded without apology. Greta Garbo, power enough to say no. Greta Garbo occupied a rare position in Hollywood, one few ever achieved and none could easily replicate. She was not merely famous, she was mythic. Audiences were mesmerized by her presence, and studios depended heavily on her box office power. That power gave her something most stars never had: leverage. From the beginning, studios wanted Garbo married. A wedding would humanize her, soften her mystique, and provide endless publicity. Rumors were planted. Suitable husbands were suggested. Gossip columns speculated endlessly, but Garbo refused every attempt. She understood what marriage meant in Hollywood. It wasn't intimacy, it was ownership. A fake marriage would trap her in permanent performance, forcing her to answer questions, attend events, and maintain a public identity she did not want. Instead, Garbo chose distance. She avoided interviews, she avoided explanations, she avoided intimacy with the press. This silence frustrated studios, but fascinated audiences. The mystery became part of her brand, unintentionally protecting her from the same fate as others. Still, the pressure never disappeared. As Hollywood evolved, tolerance for nonconformity shrank. Rather than submit, Garbo did something radical. She walked away. At the height of her fame, she retired completely, choosing privacy over preservation. Garbo's story is not about fake marriage. It's about refusing it entirely. She exposed a simple truth. Even the most powerful stars were only tolerated as long as they complied. When compliance was refused, exit became the only option. William Haines, the man who chose truth over Hollywood. William Haines was one of MGM's brightest stars during the 1920s, known for his sharp wit, effortless charm, and modern confidence. At a time when many leading men relied on rigid masculinity, Haines stood out by being relaxed, stylish, and unapologetically himself. Audiences loved him. Studios profited from him. By every professional measure, he was a success. But what made Haines truly dangerous to Hollywood was not his talent. It was his honesty. Unlike most stars of his era, William Haines did not live his private life in constant fear. Within Hollywood's inner circles, his long-term relationship with his male partner was open knowledge. It wasn't whispered about or carefully hidden. It simply existed. For years, MGM tolerated this quietly, largely because Haines was too valuable to discard. As long as his personal life stayed out of headlines, the studio looked the other way. That tolerance ended abruptly as Hollywood entered a period of stricter moral enforcement. Public image became non-negotiable. Studios tightened control, fearful of backlash from audiences and moral watchdogs. In this new climate, Haines's honesty was no longer inconvenient. It was unacceptable. MGM summoned him and presented a choice that countless others had already been forced to make. He could enter a fake marriage, publicly conform to expectations, and continue his career, or he could refuse and lose everything. There was no room for compromise, no alternative arrangement, no private understanding. Marriage was not offered as a suggestion, it was demanded as obedience. William Haines refused. The consequences were swift and absolute. His contracts were terminated. Projects involving him were quietly shelved. His name vanished from studio publicity. Hollywood did not attack him publicly. It simply erased him. In an industry that thrived on illusion, the most effective punishment was silence. Yet, what followed is what makes Haines' story extraordinary. Instead of collapsing under rejection, Haines rebuilt his life entirely outside the film industry. He transitioned into interior design, a field where his taste, confidence, and creativity flourished. Over time, he became one of the most sought-after interior designers in America, working for Hollywood's elite, including stars who had kept their own truths hidden. Even more remarkable, Haines lived openly with his partner for the rest of his life. No disguises, no contracts, no performances. While Hollywood had taken his career, it could not take his dignity. William Haines's story exposes the brutal core of Golden Age Hollywood. Fake marriages were never about morality or decency. They were about control. Compliance was rewarded. Honesty was punished. Hollywood tried to break William Haines. Instead, he became one of the few stars who proved that success does not require surrendering your truth. Sometimes the greatest act of defiance is simply refusing to lie. Hollywood's golden age promised perfection, but it was built on control. Behind every glamorous marriage was a contract. Behind every romantic headline was fear. Fake marriages were not harmless publicity. They were survival mechanisms in a system that punished honesty. Some stars complied and preserved their careers. Some resisted and vanished. A few walked away entirely. All paid a price. These stories matter because they reveal the truth behind success. Fame without freedom is fragile. Achievement without authenticity is costly. And power that demands silence is not success. It is control. At the Success Discovery, we don't just celebrate icons, we uncover the systems that shaped them. Because real success is not about how convincingly you perform, it's about whether you're allowed to live truthfully. And sometimes, the bravest success story is the one that refuses to lie.